Hey everyone, today we're diving into a single battle that sent absolute shockwaves across the globe. It's a moment in history that just completely shattered the myth of European invincibility. This is the incredible story of the Battle of Adwa.
So, I want you to picture the scene. It's 1896. We're at the absolute height of the scramble for Africa. European powers look unstoppable. And then, deep in the highlands of Ethiopia, a modern Italian colonial army isn't just beaten, it's totally, utterly wiped out. This was something that just wasn't supposed to happen. So the big question is, how on earth did it?
This whole thing didn't kick off on a battlefield with guns and cannons. No, it started, like so many wars do, with a piece of paper, and what turned out to be a really profound act of diplomatic betrayal.
Okay, so back in 1889, Ethiopia and Italy signed this thing called the Treaty of Wuchale. Now, on the face of it, it looked pretty standard. It was all about friendship, trade, cooperation, the usual stuff. It seemed like a normal agreement between two nations. But hidden inside the text was a ticking time bomb. And here's where it gets really sneaky. The whole trap was hidden in one crucial clause, Article 17. See, in the Amharic version, the one Emperor Menelik II actually read and signed, it says Ethiopia can use Italy for help with foreign affairs. It's an option, a choice. But the Italian version? It used a word that meant Ethiopia was obligated to go through them. It basically turned Ethiopia into an Italian protectorate without them even knowing it. As you can imagine, when Menelik found out about this, he immediately rejected the treaty. And Italy? Well, they decided they were going to enforce their version with an army.
And just like that, the stage was set for war. Now, back in Europe, the thinking was pretty clear. This was going to be a walk in the park, a modern, sophisticated European army against what they assumed was just, a primitive African force. That assumption? It turned out to be fatally, disastrously wrong.
I mean, when you look at the numbers, the mismatch is just wow. But not in the way the Italians thought. Under Emperor Menelik, Ethiopia pulled off this colossal mobilization, bringing together a force of up to 100,000 troops, maybe even more. They were unified, they were experienced, and they were fighting to defend their homes. And on the other side, well, General Baratieri had this much smaller army, maybe about 17,700 guys. A lot of them were homesick conscripts with pretty low morale. So, this is the picture the Italians had in their heads of Menelik's army, just a disorganized mob of tribesmen, right? Armed with spears, no real training, no real organization. They truly believed their superior European technology and discipline would win the day, no problem. But the reality on the ground, it was a completely different story. The Ethiopian army was anything but primitive. Menelik had been a really shrewd diplomat, and he'd armed his forces with at least 100,000 modern rifles. They had a powerful artillery corps, including some brand new Maxim pom-pom guns, and they were led by commanders who had been hardened by years of conflict. This wasn't a mob. This was a massive, modern, and unified fighting force. So you've got the Italian commander, General Baratieri, and he's looking at this huge Ethiopian force, and he's getting nervous. His supplies are running low. He's actually thinking about a strategic withdrawal. But he's getting all this pressure from the politicians back in Rome, and his own officers, like General de Bormida, are telling him that a retreat would be a national dishonor. It was this deadly mix of arrogance and political pressure that ultimately pushed them to attack. And that fatal underestimation, well, it led to a series of just catastrophic blunders on the battlefield, blunders that the Ethiopian forces exploited with absolute ruthless efficiency. So, on the night of February 29th, Baratieri orders his army to move forward in 3 separate columns. He's hoping for a big surprise attack at dawn. But here's the thing. Marching an army at night through rugged terrain you don't even know, that's usually a recipe for disaster. And yeah, that plan, it fell apart almost instantly. I mean, they were using terrible maps, the columns got completely lost in the dark. By the time the sun came up, instead of being ready for a coordinated attack, the Italian brigades were scattered all over the place, spread out over miles of these treacherous hills and valleys completely isolated from each other. So as the sun rises, the Ethiopians look out, and they don't see one big army coming at them. They see these little isolated chunks. And this plays right into their hands, right into their signature battle tactic, the Afina. It's a brutal, effective strategy. They'd use their massive numbers to just swarm and surround one isolated Italian brigade, pin them down with rifle and artillery fire, and then send in the main force to finish the job. They did this over and over all day long. What happened next wasn't just a defeat for Italy. It was a rout, a complete and total annihilation unlike anything a European power had ever suffered in Africa. It was utterly unprecedented.
And just look at these numbers. The human cost is just unbelievable. Out of an army of less than 18,000, Italy had about 6,000 soldiers killed and almost 4,000 more captured. I mean, their entire fighting force just ceased to exist in a single day. Now, Ethiopian losses were heavy too, which tells you just how ferocious the fighting was. But their army was still standing at the end of it.
And it wasn't just the men they lost. The material losses for Italy were just as staggering. In their frantic retreat, they left everything behind. All 56 of their cannons and more than 11,000 modern rifles, which of course were immediately scooped up by the victorious Ethiopian army.
Back in Italy, when the news hit, it was like a political earthquake. Riots exploded in major cities. The public was outraged. Just 8 days after the battle, the entire government of Prime Minister Crispi collapsed. And a few months later, a humbled Italy was forced to sign a brand new treaty, the Treaty of Addis Ababa, which threw out the old, treacherous one and flat out recognized Ethiopia as a sovereign, absolutely independent nation. But the story of Adwa doesn't end there, not by a long shot. Its impact, its legacy, went way beyond that one battlefield in Ethiopia. It became this powerful symbol that would inspire people for generations all over the world.
This quote from the scholar Molefe Asante, it just nails it. At a time when the idea of European invincibility was pretty much taken as fact, Adwa proved it was nothing but a myth. For people of African descent everywhere, Ethiopia suddenly became this powerful, living symbol of strength, of valor, and of successful resistance. You see, the ripple effects from Adwa were just huge. It became a cornerstone of the Pan-African movement. Decades later, future leaders of independence movements, guys like Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana and Jomo Kenyatta in Kenya, they would look back to Adwa for inspiration. For Italy, the humiliation was so deep, it became this national trauma, a wound that festered for 40 years until Mussolini tried to avenge it. But most importantly, Adwa cemented Ethiopia's place as a beacon of freedom on a continent that was almost entirely colonized.
So, when you boil it all down, this was a victory that was won not just with guns, but with unity. It was won with brilliant strategy and an absolutely unshakable defiance in the face of foreign domination. And that kind of leaves us with a big question, doesn't it? In a world still facing all sorts of complex challenges, what is the most important lesson we can take away from this incredible triumph?